It's working. So when you change, if you still not red, just press again. But it seems to be working.
It's recording, alright. Okay.
Finally!
Right.
Sitting in the front row. Showing my maximum. Secondary.
I'm confused. Like a physical location.
Hello, my name is Megh Plunkett, and today I'm going to be talking about how you can successfully integrate teams of internal and external developers. So I'm a senior front-end developer at Palantir.net, and for the past 6 years I've worked professionally on Drupal sites in several different capacities. I have experience working with both in-house teams as a developer and as a web services provider in a larger IT group. So I found in that time that teams that consist of contributors from multiple groups can successfully deliver a project, but they need to work together in order to accomplish those goals in a different way than maybe, let's say, a purely in-house team might. So teams that consist of developers from various places is a unique but not unusual set of circumstances. Many IT groups and in-house teams are finding, especially at large organizations, that they can't support the amount of requests being made for new apps, new websites, products, or services. And so with the influx of these new requests, they may not be able to even maintain their current properties and services that they already provide to their group. So this sense of being overwhelmed, they then realize that they don't have the resources or time to feasibly implement the work, and that they need to supplement their team or department in one way or another. So these are some examples of times when organizations hire a vendor or agency. So they need additional development resources, they might need a skill set or expertise that they don't currently have, maybe full-time talent they've been trying to hire locally for, but they can't find it in their current state or even vicinity. If full-time remote work isn't a possibility, or telecommuting, maybe they need extra help, and that is when they start talking to vendors or agencies. And specifically, this is a tricky one when project development needs to move faster than it already is. And another reason why they might hire a vendor or agency is to provide specific services. So how does this impact project management? These teams have the same goals as the in-house team. They want to complete the work on time for you. They want to come in under budget or at budget, and they want to make stakeholders happy. The only difference is some of the added challenges because of the external factors. So some positive outcomes that are possible with working with an external group of developers: the project may finish ahead of schedule or on time because you have increased velocity. There might be higher quality work coming out because you've hired people who have either more expertise than your in-house team does, or they have previous relevant experience in that field or a specific type of project. And your project can sometimes finish under budget because if you don't have them needed for, let's say, a week or two, they can switch to a different client project and you're not paying them for that time. These types of teams for project managers can also mean more work, though, and here I'll get into a couple of reasons why. But namely, a project can considerably take longer with external developers. I don't know if any of you have read The Mythical Man Month. It's basically a book on software engineering and project management by Fred Brooks. And the theme is that adding manpower to late software project makes it later. So you can sometimes also get lower quality work, and if a project is close to being over budget already, hiring more people certainly can push that budget over. But before we discuss what other things can go wrong, I want to talk about preparation. And this often gets skipped over because project managers or team leads might not have the agency to be a part of the vendor or agency selection process. But I believe that in order for an internal team to work well with external developers, the in-house team needs to be invested in the idea from the beginning. And I think that as a project manager or team lead, you're situated in such a way that you, with this right preparation, can set your team up for success. Building trust and reliability, which are both fundamental to this success, can be harder to accomplish with mixed teams. For example, if you have an internal team member who's critical to your project, but they don't feel that they necessarily want to make the effort to work well with the external developers that you're going to be bringing on, that can be a huge issue. And I think some of these solutions might help alleviate or even prevent that. So you want to establish enthusiasm with your in-house team. Is your team even on board with the idea? And ask them what roles they think that their team needs or could be supplemented with. And then if you've narrowed down some options of agencies, groups, consultants that you want to work with, continue asking your team if they have ever worked or know of anyone in that agency. If it's Drupal specific work, you can look the company up on Drupal.org to see who their developers and what their whole kind of view about Drupal is. And then you can also find out if other people you know have worked with people from the agency in the past. You can also do some research, and I encourage people to request references and ask for recommendations, much as you would do if you were hiring for an in-house position. So asking the agency for examples of work or case studies, asking to see work that is similar than what you're trying to do in your organization, and then possibly even requesting recommendations from previous clients that they've worked with. And I also might ask that to meet with people who will possibly be working with you from the agency. So asking them what project are they coming off of, how long have they been working professionally in the field, and what ways they think they can add value to your organization's project. But here are some pitfalls. So some quick and easy ones are when you're trying to save money. If you sign on developers who are less experienced, maybe because the rate that the agency charges for their time is less, that can end up costing more in the long run if there are more revisions required, or they have less experience with the type of solutions that might be necessary. It's not always a bad thing, but it can come up. And then if you're trying to save time, signing on too many resources quickly in order to get work done faster goes back to the idea of that mythical man month, but you also have to take into account the amount of onboarding time plus resourcing multiplied by each person that you're quickly adding to your project. So pitfall number one, I always ask that people resist setting the expectation that an external developer will immediately be productive on the project, and here's why. Especially if your organization is rotating quickly through external developers at a specific agency that you're working for, each time a new person comes on It can mean more setup, more onboarding, the ramping up time, and then energy from you, the project manager, and anyone on your internal team who has to answer questions or get them going. So I ask that people think about leaving adequate time for onboarding, and then also any training time needed to bring developers up to speed with your project or organization. Like, this is how we do things here, so on and so forth. Training time can vary, but it's also something that you can try. And so resourcing the developers beyond the time they're allocated in a week or their contract can cause problems for your project. And then keeping everyone busy on a large multidisciplinary team can be a problem because you don't want to assign more work than the external developer is allocated for during a sprint, but you also want to make sure that they're fully tasked so that you are getting the most for the amount of time you've contracted them for. So some examples of mis-resourcing. If your group requested the wrong skill set for the project, that can make things take longer because the developer may not be working within their wheelhouse. And then accepting developers based on the fact that they have availability based and your timeline and deadlines without making sure that they're right for the project can also result in some mis-resourcing. And then another thing I've seen is asking for developers that have skill sets that duplicate people that you already have in-house, and then you don't actually have enough work to support both of those individuals. So pitfall number 2, this isn't as common, but short-term on-sites for kickoffs, big meetings, launches, anytime you're having people come on to your campus or into your office on behalf of your project, the accommodations, the time, the travel, the food, meals, that's probably going to get billed to your project, and that can eat into the budget if you haven't already created a line item for that sort of thing. The same thing with a long-term on-site work arrangement, housing, transportation, meals, incidentals. And sometimes you may need to improve the developer's tech stack that you're having work with you. So that can mean different hardware, software, licenses, accounts, and then sometimes work visas. So pitfall number 3, failure to budget time for maintaining the vendor relationship results in additional project management overhead. So the regular communication with the vendors, management about the project takes extra time, like sending update emails, communicating decisions, coordinating between multiple vendors, and then any extra communication or feedback when things aren't going well. So that can add up really quickly. You also need to take into account that if you're nearing the end of your vendor agency contract, you're going to need time to negotiate ongoing terms. And that can be difficult to time because you want the developers to continue their momentum without having the contract end short. It can also take time if you find yourself needing to justify the cost of adding external developers to higher management or stakeholders. And another thing is if developers are asking major implementation questions during the sprint, it could mean a couple of different things. A sign that maybe the tickets they're receiving were not well scoped or groomed, that specifications were not sufficient before the sprint started, or that the developers were not engaged during sprint planning. So it's pretty unusual for external developers working with an in-house team to be given the lead or given room to make decisions on the fly, but in most cases they'll need to be asking and looking to you as the project manager for answers to their questions, more explicit instruction, and tend to be more deliberate in an effort not to cause regressions, but all of that really translates to extra project management overhead. Therefore, I think there's a need to dedicate more time to documenting and specifying the work so that they're not guessing once the sprint starts. And then clearing some organizational hurdles. So issues can arise with teams of developers that aren't all under the same organizational structure or management because they don't all have and are not all working within the same context. So, for example, external developers may not necessarily be familiar with your organization or industry when they start working with you. So I think it's helpful to bring people up to speed in the beginning. For example, explaining any acronyms that are widely used in the organization, explaining the hierarchy of the organization, who is in charge of whom, and defining any or clarifying any internal jargon that the team uses. And then before the developers start work, it's helpful to create an organization email account if they need it, provide access to Google Drive, Dropbox, any servers, Jira accounts, any other project management software, chat, SSH keys, VPN access, the list goes on and on. But if you can outline and set up all of this type of dependency work ahead of time, you'll save a lot of headaches later on in the project. This can also include GitHub or any server permissions, software licenses that they may need but don't have already through their company. And then if they're going to be coming into your office, any like building or office access codes, keys, security clearance, etc. So calendar scheduling and time zones is a big one. If you can share any team, organization, or office expectations, like, for example, we work from home on Fridays, so please feel free to also do so. Or we bring lunch on Tuesdays to eat together and learn. Those things are valuable to creating a whole team as one unit. Ask for and note the external team schedule, holidays, vacations, and communicate those to your team so that they're on the same page about who's going to be out and who's not. Similarly, you can share your team's holidays and vacations, and specifically whether or not the external team will need to be expected to work on those days. Adding meetings in calendars of people that need to be there and marking individuals as optional if possible. And I only mention this because it's not always the case that both the external and internal developers are using the same calendar software, and so it's possible to double book meetings or not have meetings booked at all. And then time zone lag. I believe it's a blessing and a curse because if it works out, you can have people who are very offset from your time zone working at the time when you're not. So that means that things are getting done faster. But if the person opposite you gets blocked, then there's a whole day of lag because you have to unblock them and you didn't know while their working hours that was happening. If you can establish working hours, that helps prevent people from not having a good work-life balance, and then also clarifies who is supposed to be working when. I think another thing to do, especially if you have more than 2 or 3 time zones off, if you can switch off on who's taking early meetings or late meetings, that makes a huge difference for your team because one group isn't always staying up through their dinner while the other group is working, or vice versa. And then accepting the extra responsibility of managing vendors is more project management responsibility, especially if you then push that responsibility onto someone else on your in-house team who was not expecting to be managing an individual or a whole external developer relationship, that can cause issues. And I think it's important to make sure that it's clear which role each person will play on your whole team. So no matter if you have an external and an internal developer, internal or external project managers, like everyone has a role to play, and making sure that everyone knows what to expect is a great way to avoid issues. So I think it's valuable to resource vendors evenly and add more work as their momentum builds and they become more comfortable on your project. It helps to be pragmatic about who's doing what. For example, like figuring out what an individual is most able to do and then assigning them when that thing comes up more frequently. It might be a safer bet to give long-term work to internal team members in some circumstances. And what I mean is that a high priority or sensitive task might be easily handled more by someone who you have in your in-house team umbrella. And then if you can assign clear and straightforward tasks that do not require background or context of the entire project initially, and only assign those types of tasks later when an individual has a greater idea and feel for the whole project, that makes resourcing a little bit more efficient. So let's talk now about the team dynamics of both of these groups coming together. Like I mentioned before, I think it's imperative to set the tone and be the example of how the team will function as a unit. And the vendors or agency external people do have an extra layer of management between them and you and the responsibility to their company. So if they have initial investment in the project, that means that they're being set up for success. And the goal is to have expectations that the internal members will be collaborating with the external developers. Some small things I think that help create a team unity are introducing the external members to your team as though you would introduce an internal hire. Be clear with all team members on start and end dates and availability, so that Joe will start on June 1st and will be working with us through the end of December. That gives people an opportunity to start building individual relationships with people they know are going to be around for a while. You can decide smaller things like where they'll sit in the office if they're going to be coming in to work with you. And then it sets expectations for every team member to know what's going on, and there isn't a surprise when their contract is up and you don't see them anymore. It's also a good idea to outline who people should ask for help, and maybe even set up an onboarding buddy from an internal team so you kind of have that connection, and that will carry through the rest of your project. I find that external developers are less exposed to the politics and turnover in their clients' companies, and so they may be able to continue working when there are issues. But some ways to make sure that their productivity carries over through the rest of the team are trying heads down or blocks of focus time for all team members to reduce interruptions, scoping work well for all of the team members, not just junior members, new members, or external or remote developers, and setting realistic goals and deadlines. I think it's also possible to improve productivity if you provide better equipment, either upgrade hardware or software, or provide a reliable internet connection if video calls are a critical element of your communication suite and they're getting choppy or people are getting dropped. So I think as the project manager, you are in the best position to affect and impact the team dynamics. So if you can create and follow a set of processes that work for you and your team and adjust those as necessary, that helps create this holistic experience. Having higher ups and stakeholders of your internal organization recognize and thank external members for their contributions, just as they might do so for an internal employee for work well done, can definitely improve morale, which is a good thing. And then you can also engage in team building. So also like setting clear expectations, setting a culture of respect, and making it clear that if there's ever an issue, who you can talk to about something. And for the specific case of a larger in-house organization that might be working with multiple vendors or agencies at one time and even on various projects, establishing a culture of documentation and valuing the time spent on specification, making sure that your developers are leaving inline comments, filling out readmes, doing testing, and all of this will play a huge part when you switch from one development partner to another, because you've left some resources and context for the new people coming on. If you have a clear start and end date for each vendor, and you can provide some sort of overlap so that they can do a handoff for onboarding, I think that saves a lot of time. Sometimes people treat their vendors and agencies as separate siloed groups that don't really get to interact, but I think it can be beneficial when you do allow them to communicate and work through the problems that could arise later. And regular check-ins with vendors, finding out what is working, what is not working. You should never have radio silence when you're working with an external group. So also making sure that if they are supposed to provide deliverables, that those are concise and agreed upon ahead of time, and that once you receive them, that they're actually in your possession. And what I mean by that is that they're on your Dropbox, your drive, or your server, and not that of the person who created it for you. That means that you then have access to all the accounts, hosting, services, and that if you make sure that you have admin or higher privileges, you control things when your contract ends. And I don't mean anything bad, it's good to know that the stuff that you paid for is actually you're in control of it. And then another note on that same line is rescinding permissions from agency and vendor developers on their last day, and also changing password protects both you and them. So how can you improve collaboration? So checking in with your team about whether the work being done is going well, is the quality of work suffering, are the tasks accomplished in a timely manner. And as a project manager, you'll be seeing this because of if you're using Jira and you have notifications of who's closing what. But I think it's also helpful to have a conversation about how things are going, because you might get some more context that isn't immediately visible just through the tickets that are being closed. If you also have check-ins as a whole team, internal and external developers, if they're getting enough work, too much, not enough, not the right kind of work. I also want to note that non-internal team members may not feel comfortable pointing out blockers or issues, so if you can have a private conversation with them, you may get that information as opposed to them sharing it during the stand-up. You can do one-on-one check-ins with them, and then if you can encourage all of your developers to work together and ask each other for help, it also helps to make the right people available. So a common thing that happens is that team leads or senior architects of your project have a lot of meetings soon, so it's helpful to give them some time to check in with all the developers to make sure that they can ask questions. And then I think asking for insight or ideas from your external teammates could prove to they might have some valuable feedback that you wouldn't have received otherwise. So some ways to prevent communication breakdowns, even though you're communicating across all these channels, is if there's an issue, discuss it with the person before going to their agency side manager. And I think they don't want to hear negative feedback via their side. That means that they weren't given an opportunity to kind of work through things on their own. And a way to figure out if this is an issue is asking one of your internal in-house individuals that's working closely with external developers to see if they have suggestions or have observed anything. And if a developer is unreliable, their dates are slipping, you can discuss with them what's going on, and it's probably ideal to reassign their priority tickets to other team members within 3 days or less, and assign them lower priority work for the time being. And all of these things are not part of the ideal scenario, but they do happen. I think that communication is critical to making this whole thing work. So using the same communication tools across the team, communicating or changes or decisions in a way that's accessible to all of the members, even if they were in the meeting, like meeting notes posted somewhere or backlogs of chat is helpful. Another part of communication and communicating skillfully is learning the pronouns of people that you're working with on the project, and then also learning people's names and making an effort to pronounce them the way that they want them to be pronounced. Recognizing and adjusting to any language barriers, including technical terminology, and then also recognizing location barriers. So can they join the meeting remotely? Can they clearly hear? Are they able to participate in real time? And then if you are following Agile methodology, I think it's critical to have all team members participating in the stand-up specifically. And if that's not feasible for whatever reason, use other ways of communicating that stand-up, like notes in Slack, Jira, a Google Doc, even email. I think that stand-up meeting is critical to the project momentum moving forward. So when people feel that they can positively contribute and add value, I think you'll get the best work from them. And that served me well, so I hope that you'll have some good takeaways, and I appreciate you coming to this talk. Thank you. I just want to mention, if you can please take the time to give me some feedback on this session, it would be much appreciated. You can either use the QR code to go directly to the joined in, or I have that link also on my session page on the MidCamp website. And there's a MidCamp Sprint Day on Sunday. Everyone is welcome. There's 3 areas of focus: Drupal core, documentation, and Drupal commerce. You can bring a laptop and lunch will be provided. They just ask that you RSVP for free so that they know how much space and food they need. So does anyone have any questions? Okay, thanks so much.